During my childhood, my family was like a drop of water in a vast river, never remaining in one location for too long. We settled in Rhode Island when I was 8, and there we remained until I went to college in Colorado Springs. Most of my memories rooted in Rhode Island, but there are fragments in my attic of a brain which belong to various homes we had lived in when I was much younger. Most of these memories are unclear and pointless, chasing after another boy in the back, yard of a house in North Carolina, trying to build a raft to float on the creek behind the apartment we rented in Pennsylvania, and so on. But there is one set of memories which remains as clear as glass, as though they were made just yesterday. I wondered whether these memories are simply lucid dreams produced by the lung sickness I experienced that spring, but in my heart, I know they are real. We were living in a house just outside the bustling metropolis of New Vineyard, Maine, population 643. It was a large structure, especially for a family of 3. There were a number of rooms that I didn't see in the 5 months we resided there. In some ways, it was a waste of space, but it was the only house on the market at the time, at least within an hour commute to my father's place of work. The day after my 5th birthday, attended by my parents alone, I came down with a fever. The doctor said I had mononucleosis, which meant no rough play and more fever for at least another 3 weeks. It was a horrible timing to be bedridden. We were in the process of packing our things to move to Pennsylvania, and most of my things were already packed away in boxes, leaving my room barren. My mother brought me ginger ale and books several times a day, and they served the function of being my primary form of entertainment for the next weeks. Boredom always loomed just around the corner, waiting to rear its ugly head and compound my misery. I don't recall how I met Mr. Widemouth exactly. I think it was almost about a week after I was diagnosed with mono. The first memory of the small little creature was asking me if he had a name. He told me to call him Mr. Widemouth because his mouth was large. In fact, everything about him was large in comparison to his body. His head, eyes, his crooked ears, but his mouth was by far the largest. He looked kind of like a Furby, I said as he flipped through one of my books. Mr. Widemouth stopped and he gave me a puzzled look. Furby? What's a Furby? He asked. I shrugged. You know, the toy, the little robot with big ears you can pet and feed them. Almost like a real pet. Oh, Mr. Widemouth resumed his activity. You don't need one of those. Those aren't the same as having a real friend. I remember Mr. Widemouth disappearing every time my mother stepped by to check in on me. I lay under bed, he later explained. I don't want your parents to see me because I'm afraid they won't let us play anymore. We didn't do much during those first few days. Mr. Widemouth just looked at my books, fascinated by the stories and pictures they contained. The 3rd or 4th morning after I met him, he greeted me with a large smile on his face. I have a new game we can play, he said. We have to wait until after your mother comes to check on you, because she can't see us play. It's a secret game. After my mom delivered more books and soda at the usual time, Mr. Widemouth slipped out from under the bed and tugged my hand. We have to go to the room at the end of this hallway, he said. I objected at first, as my parents had forbidden me to leave my bedroom without permission, but Mr. Widemouth persisted until I gave in. The room in question had no furniture or wallpaper. Its only distinguishing feature was a window opposite to the doorway. Mr. Widemouth darted across the room and gave the window a firm push, flinging it open, and then he beckoned me to look out the ground below. We were on the 2nd story of the house, but it was on a hill, and from this angle the drop was farther than 2 stories due to the incline. I like to play pretend up here, Mr. Widemouth explained. I pretend that there is a big, soft trampoline below this window, and I can jump. If you pretend hard enough, you can bounce right back up like a feather. I want you to try. I was 5 years old with a fever, so only a hint of skepticism darted through my thoughts as I looked down and considered the possibility. It's a long drop, I said. That's all part of the fun. It would be fun if it was only a short drop. If there were that way, you might as well bounce on a real trampoline. I toyed with the idea of picturing myself falling through thin air only to bounce right back to the window on something unseen by the human eyes. The realist in me prevailed. Maybe some other time. I don't know if I have enough imagination. I can get hurt. Mr. Widemouth's face contorted into a snarl, but only for a moment. Anger gave way to disappointment. If you say so, he said. He spent the rest of the day under my bed, quiet as a mouse. The following morning, Mr. Widemouth arrived holding a small box. I want to teach you how to joke, he said. Here are some things you can use to practice before I start giving you lessons. I looked in the box and it was full of knives. My parents will kill me, I shouted. Horrified that Mr. Widemouth had brought knives into my room, objects that my parents would never allow me to touch. I'll be spanked and grounded for a year. Mr. Widemouth frowned. It's fun to juggle with these. I want you to try. I pushed the box away. I can't. I'll get into trouble. Knives aren't safe to just throw in the air. Mr. Widemouth's frown deepened into a scowl. He took the box of knives and slid under my bed, remaining there for the rest of the day. I began to wonder how often he was under me. I started having trouble sleeping after that. Mr. Widemouth often woke me up at night saying he put a real trampoline under the window, a big one that I couldn't see in the dark. I always declined and tried to go back to sleep, but Mr. Widemouth persisted. Sometimes he stayed by my side until early in the morning, encouraged me to jump. He wasn't fun to play with anymore at this point. My mother came to me one morning and told me I had permission to walk around outside. She thought the fresh air would be good for me, especially after being confined in my room for so long. Ecstatic, I put on my sneakers and trotted out to the back porch, yearning for the feeling of the sun in my face. Mr. Widemouth was waiting for me. I have something I want you to see, he said. I must have given him a weird look because he then said, It's safe, I promise. I followed him to the beginning of a deer trail which ran through the woods behind the house. This isn't a porn path, he explained. I've had a lot of friends about your age. When they are ready, I took them down this path to a special place. You aren't ready yet, but one day, I hope to take you there. I returned to the house wondering what kind of place lay beyond that trail. 2 weeks after I met Mr. Widemouth, the last load of our things had been packed into a moving truck. I would be in a cab of that truck, sitting next to my father for the long drive to Pennsylvania. I considered telling Mr. Widemouth that I would be leaving, but even at 5 years old, I was beginning to suspect that perhaps the creature's intention were not to my benefit, despite what he had said otherwise. For this reason alone, I decided to keep my departure a secret. My father and I were in the truck at 4 a.m. He was hoping to make it to Pennsylvania by lunchtime tomorrow with the help of an endless supply of coffee and a 6-pack of energy drinks. He seemed more like a man who was about to run a marathon rather than one whose body spent 2 days sitting still. Early enough for you? My father asked with a hint of sympathy. I nodded and placed my head against the window, hoping for some sleep before the sun came up. I felt my father's hand on my shoulder. This is the last move, son, I promise. I know it's hard for you, as sick as you've been. Once Daddy gets promoted, we can settle down and you can make some friends. I opened my eyes as we backed out of the driveway. I saw Mr. Widemouth's silhouette in my bedroom window. He stood motionless until the truck was about to turn on the main road. He gave a pitiful little wave goodbye, steak knife in his hand. I didn't wave back. Years later, I returned to the new vineyard. The piece of land our house stood upon was empty except for the foundation. As the house burned down a few years ago, after my family left, out of curiosity, I followed the deer trail that Mr. Widemouth had shown me. Part of me expected for him to jump out from a tree behind and scare the living bejesus out of me, but I felt that Mr. Widemouth was gone, somehow tied to the house that no longer existed. The trail ended at New Vineyard Memorial Cemetery. I noticed that many of the tombstones belonged to children. My. What a chilling story indeed. I guess let's talk about it then. First off, let's talk about the twist. The twist at the very end, where it is revealed that Mr. Widemouth had basically taken all the dead kids to the graveyard. First off, there is one big problem that I have with this twist. Is the fact that it was introduced towards the very end of the story. I think it would have been cool had, the twist itself is, fine, but I think it would have worked more efficiently if we'd introduced it at the, around the beginning of the story when we're introduced Mr. Widemouth, where Mr. Widemouth takes the main character and says, look, this is where I take people who are really close to me, but only if you play enough games, I might be able to take you there. So I think it would have been interesting where we'd see where as the story progresses and we see, our main character doing these dangerous acts, we then sort of have to piece and figure out, okay, what is the path that Mr. Widemouth is taking this kid? If he did all this and he actually succeeded, taking his own life, does he take his soul there or does he take the body there? The twist itself, it's great, but again though, the problem is just as it is introduced, it is then revealed in a couple, paragraphs later, which is really, there's no build-up, there's no speculation, there's not enough. You already kind of know that he's trying to get him, trying to kill him, and then the last thing he sees of him is him with a knife, so it basically, kind of confirms, oh, he was just going to take him out back and kill him. But that's really my main gripe with this story. The character itself, for a kid at his age, that's, kind of smart. I definitely remember when I was his age, I would definitely do a bunch of dumb shit along with other kids, but this kid was definitely smart. More smart than other, horror movie characters in some movies. Speaking about our main character, the thing that I love about this story is it was at the beginning, he says that he's not really sure that, if this actually happened, he remembers it, but, so well, but at the same time, he's not really sure if this was either in his imagination or this was part of the sickness that he had, because, in the story, he had mono for a time, and he was a very young age, so, keep in mind also his things, he were gone, so it, it kind of makes sense that he would have an imaginary friend to keep himself busy. But then he starts but deep down, he knows that this actually happened, that this was not an imagination, especially towards the end, where it's sort of confirmed that this, that this was no imagination, this actually did happen to him. And I do like that we're in the story, we're sort of given that, is this true? Did this happen? Did this or not? Because, Mr. Widemouth doesn't show, disappears when the parents are around, but when he's alone, he appears, which sort of adds to that, maybe it didn't happen, maybe it did, but towards the end, it is confirmed that it is indeed real, which I find is a much better twist, which if they, did that instead of the, he took, there was a graveyard, kind of, I think it would be a much better twist. But actually, speaking of Mr. Widemouth, so let's talk about Mr. Widemouth. Mr. Widemouth is definitely a much more interesting character compared to the other creepypasta monsters out there. He's sort of an original, and his whole shtick is that he preys on children and sort of gets them to commit suicide. Now, as to why is something I don't know and never really explained in the story. Yes, he has this whole graveyard of kid tombstones, but For what purpose? Does he have fun with it, or does he use their bones to make his house, or does he take their soul? Like, what is the purpose? And sort of keeps you guessing as to why he does this. Why does he do this? And it looks like that his last ever interaction, or last ever thing that he did, was the house burning down, which I like that, where towards the end the character says that, oh, even though there's nothing here, I know he's also not here because the house is burned down. So leaves you wondering, did the last kid create the fire, or did he do that himself? And was that, or did the kid fight back and burned him and his whole family down? What was the purpose? Which sort of begs a question, and I'm surprised there's no sequel after that. There's no like, there's sequel potential, and they never really, the creator never really capitalized on that, which I don't know if anyone's ever done that. That'll be interesting though, to see what had happened. Why did the house burn down? But anyways, I digress. Of course, design wise, I mean, like the main character, compared him to, he is a furry. He looks like a little furry, which there's a couple pictures online, but here's one on the screen, which is the popular one. But yeah, he's just, like his name says, Mr.Widemouth, a big smiling grin, some big eyes, and some big ears. So yeah, design wise, I mean, it's alright, nothing too interesting, but nothing too unique or creepy. Friendly enough for a kid, but creepy enough for an adult. And so another thing that I'm kind of curious about this character is that, does he get weaker, does he die, or does he, like, why is it that he hides from adults? Why doesn't he just play pretend, or stay still like a toy? That's that sort of shtick. Has he had past experiences where that never really ever worked, or things have gone wrong? I don't know. There's not really a clear explanation for that. And is he the only one? Is there more people like him? Because he is a Mr. Is there a Mrs.? Do they have kids? Okay, I'm probably just getting a little too crazy here, but point is, he's definitely a much more interesting character. Which actually, another neat little part that actually got me thinking while I was reading the story is this. Because there's this one thing that I like about the story, and that just sort of begs the question and got me thinking throughout the story is Mr. Widemouth, updated? Does he know what's going on in the world? And the reason why I ask that is because there's this, when we are introduced to Mr. Widemouth, the first couple of days he's with the kid, he's actually reading all his books, all the books that his mom and dad bring him. He's reading all the books, not really pushing the kid to, commit suicide. He's reading all the books, and then later on, the kid, compares him to a furry. Obviously, he doesn't know what that is, and, he tells him what it is, but without giving it much thought, he's like, oh, you don't need that, you got a real person like me. Which, sort of then begs the question, well, does he know, what technology is? Does he know what the internet is? Does he know what all this other stuff is? Is he up to date? Because the thing is, Mr. Widemouth is secluded from society. Like, the house itself is away from society. I mean, it's literally on a hill next to a grave. So, obviously, it's far away from the city and any other houses. Not to mention, also, Mr. Widemouth is tied to the house, so I'd assume that he can't really leave the house property. He can only, or the land itself, he can really only go so far. So then begs the question, well, say, like, say a method like that worked back in the 1800s doesn't work anymore. Does he update? Like, does he know? Like, basically, is he just a creature that lives in the wood in the house and sort of bases methods on finding information of the characters, or no, the residents of the house, and use their own items against them? Like, he used like a knife, try to get him to jump out the window. And has he always used those methods, or does he try to stay up to date? with current technology and current materials. That's sort of the big thing. I don't know. That was it's a neat little, it's a weird little quirk that he's just reading the books before he gets to the killing, and like he doesn't even know what like a furry is. And I mean, and the thing is, those things are really fucking popular when they were first introduced. So it'd be kind of hard to miss what they were. So I don't know. It's that neat little characteristic that sort of adds, another layer of interest, which then, begs the question, well, how long has he been there? Has he always been there around the land, or has he been there since, the house was built? And, or when the fire broke, did he escape and go somewhere else? I don't know, it's this very intriguing, stuff that you can, I guess sequel potential that you could do. So many ideas you could possibly do with Mr. Widemouth. I mean, definitely a much more, interesting character you can do than other previous characters. But anyways, I digress. Anyways, with that being said, I definitely recommend this story. Link in the description below. Uh, Anyways, that's going to be it for today, you guys. Like, comment, subscribe. Don't forget to check out all my other social medias. And don't forget to check out all the other stories. And with that being said, I am out.